Thank you, Chair. Before I start, let me firstly thank the Director Clause for giving me this opportunity. And also let me pay my personal tribute to the people of Bangladesh who stood up to a very, very abusive army for 9 long months and who fought for their freedom. My tributes to the Mukti Bahini, who physically fought and created an environment, as had been stated by the chair, to enable the Indian armed forces to operate and achieve a great victory. And finally, my personal tribute to the brave men of the Indian armed forces, many of whom gave their lives, many of whom were injured, and all of them gave of their very best to create a new nation. The Liberation War was perhaps the most defining moment in India's post-independence history. In a short span of 13 days, the strategic balance in South Asia had permanently altered and a new nation, Bangladesh, came into being. When we look into an environmental scan, I thought I will go all the way back to 1947. So when we look into history, the fissures within Pakistan have started soon after the state was formed. In a sense, there was almost an element of inevitability that a state created with two wings separated by 1,600 kilometers of Indian territory was destined to disintegrate. In fact, the Lahore Resolution of 1940 had actually called for the carving out of the two Muslim-majority states, one in the west and the other in the east. So when Pakistan came into existence in 1947, the ruling elite was cognizant of the challenges they faced in maintaining the unity and integrity of the newly formed state, which had as its constituents 5 major ethno-linguistic groups. We had the Bengalis, the Sindhis, Baluchis, Punjabis, and the Pakhtuns. And at that time, the ruling elite chose to create unity through the creation of an Islamic identity and a binding Islamic ethos. The Urdu-speaking elite, which had migrated to Pakistan from the minority provinces of India, abrogated to themselves a major say in the shaping of the narrative at the expense of the region's indigenous intellectuals and activists. Consequently, the constituent regions of Pakistan were denied a significant role in shaping the destiny of the new nation, and this is what led to the future events. We move now to the 12th of March 1949, when Pakistan takes its first major step in framing the constitution. And here the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan adopted what they called the Objectives Resolution as a set of guiding principles for the future constitution. And the Objective Resolution stated that sovereignty belonged to Allah alone, but he has delegated it to the state of Pakistan through its people for being exercised as a sacred trust. So right at the very beginning, the clergy was given a hand, or they were given an opportunity to shape the destiny of the nation, which has persisted to this day. Now, thereafter, a 25-member Basic Principles Committee was set up to frame the Constitution. Now, this committee produced an interim report in September of 1950, which made only peripheral references to the Islamic nature of the state and appeared to deny the Bengalis the appropriate representation in the National Assembly. It therefore came under severe criticism from both the clergy and the Bengalis, who were 54% of the country's population. So, to assuage Bengali sentiment, at that time, Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan proposed giving parity to East Pakistan with the combined provinces of West Pakistan. Now, once he did this, or once he proposed this, the Punjabis in Pakistan got upset, for they feared that their importance would be reduced. Subsequently, Liaquat Ali Khan was assassinated in October 1951 while on a visit to Punjab, which further convinced the Bengalis that he had been killed because of his leanings to the east. Now, he was replaced as the Prime Minister by Khwaja Nazimuddin, who was the Governor General at that time, and he took over as the second Prime Minister of Pakistan and became the first Bengali to be elevated to that post. His attempt to impose Urdu on a Bengali-speaking populace led to violent unrest in 1952, which forced the Muslim League government of Nurul Amin to call in the army to restore order. Now, this destroyed the Muslim League's provincial base and led to the rise of the Awami League. And a young man at that time, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who led the agitation, he rose to cult status. So what we see here is that within the first 5 years of the formation of Pakistan, serious fissures had crept in between the two wings of the state. The 1954 election in East Pakistan wiped out the Muslim League, and that in conjunction with the earlier language riots, which occurred against Urdu being imposed as a national language, were warning signs to accommodate Bengalis in nation building. Unfortunately, that warning was not heeded. Now we come to the period 1954 to 58, and we witness here Pakistan's parliamentary system as being just a mere facade, and the civil services assisted by the military dominating the decision-making process. The Muslim League did not seek a popular mandate. Had they done so, it would have meant power shifting to the Bengali population in the East Wing from the Muhajir Punjabi elite. So the Western Wing politicians and bureaucrats, they were also reluctant to share power with those in the Eastern Wing. To reduce the voting power of the Bengalis, the plan of having only two provinces, East Pakistan and West Pakistan, was devised, giving to each equal representation. Now, parity was achieved, but it robbed the Bengalis of the clear majority, which stood at 54%, to the West Wing's 46%. However, even this was not acceptable to the Punjabi politicians, as the Bengalis would have more seats in the National Assembly than those held by the Punjab. So here we find the Bengalis, as well as the smaller provinces of West Pakistan, being resentful of the one unit scheme. But the primary source of conflict lay in determining how the relationship between the center and the provinces should be structured. The military takeover of the state starts now with General Ayub Khan taking over power in October 1958 and beginning what we call the era of military rule, which has plagued Pakistan off and on since then. Now, under Ayub, the military justified its role in the moral and strategic terms and took on itself the onus of addressing Pakistan's security concerns, which increasingly became identified with the security of Pakistan's Punjab and the Northwest Frontier Province, as nearly all its manpower was drawn from these two provinces. Now, Ayub believed that East Pakistan was indefensible, and so the defense of the East Wing lay in the strength of West Pakistan. This reasoning did not go down too well with the Bengalis, and was also one of the factors which led to the creation of Bangladesh. During the decade of Ayub's military dictatorship, the economic initiatives taken were centered for the most part favoring Punjabi merchants, the feudal aristocracy, and the retired military officers and civil servants. The economic power or the economic wealth also was not equitably distributed, and while Bangladesh was the major contributor of foreign exchange, its share of getting that same foreign exchange for its own welfare correspondingly did not come about. And when we look at the economic wealth which was created between the two wings, we find that the Western Wing was 1.5 times economically more better off than East Pakistan at that time. So what we have here now, the Bengali political leadership, they reacted very strongly to the perceived slights by the Western Wing. And now we find that the Awami League, led by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, putting forth in February 1966 a 6-point agenda to the central government. Now, these 6 points, later amended and incorporated in the 1970 election manifesto, they sought a federal parliamentary government where the federal government would be responsible only for defense and foreign affairs. The other 4 points pertain to having separate freely convertible currencies, a fiscal policy being the responsibility of the federating unit, separate accounts for foreign exchange earnings, and federating units being empowered to maintain a militia or paramilitary force. This didn't go down well with the powers which were concentrated in West Pakistan, and Mujib was arrested in 1968 in a fake case, the Agartala conspiracy case. Fortunately, all the charges against him were dismissed. But what the impact was that Mujib was already a hero in Bangladesh. He once again achieved cult status. Now, increasing opposition to Ayub, both in the West and the East wings, forced him to resign and hand over power to General Yahya Khan. At this time, Bhutto also fell out with Ayub and formed his own political party, the Pakistan People's Party. Yahya promised to hold elections in 1970 and also pledged that the seats in the National Assembly would be apportioned on the basis of one person, one vote. For the first time, I think the Pakistan military adhered to what they had stated. And in the 1970 elections, the Awami League won 167 of East Pakistan's legislative seats, with Bhutto's PPP winning only 88 of West Pakistan's 144 seats. Here, I must mention that Cyclone Bhola, which had taken place a month earlier on November 12th, also contributed a great deal to Mujib's victory, as the lack of support from the West Wing led to increasing bitterness and angst against the Pakistani state. Now, here we find a situation by which the Awami League has won a very convincing victory and Mujib should rightly have been made the Prime Minister. But Bhutto was not prepared to hand over power to the East Wing, and in this he was supported by the army. So we find serious disturbances in East Pakistan coming up now simply because the West was not prepared to hand over power. Yahya perhaps was sincere but politically inept, and he lacked the skills to reconcile the differences between Mujib and Bhutto. The military opted to use force to resolve what was essentially a political problem, and 75,000 troops were sent to East Pakistan in March 1971 to quell the disturbances. Lieutenant General Tikka Khan was made in charge of quelling the dissidents in East Pakistan, and that is when the military launched Operation Searchlight on 25th March 1971, marking the beginning of a 9-month-long genocide, which would end only after the surrender of the Pakistan Army on 16 December. Here, I think it is important to add that Mujib was arrested the very next day, in fact, on the night of 25th, 26th March, and then he was whisked away to West Pakistan. Bhutto stayed on as a facade. Now, during this 9-month-long genocide which took place, there are reports, various reports, we really don't know the accurate numbers, but approximately perhaps 3 million people were killed, and about the same number of women were raped. Women as young as 8 and as old as 80 years, none of them were spared. And about 10 million people fled to India as refugees. Numbers, however, can never do justice to what was actually witnessed on the ground. Now, it was to fight this repression that the Mukti Bahini was created, and it was this force which became a permanent thorn in the flesh to the Pakistan military, forcing it to spend huge effort in guarding its own assets. Now, that story, of course, will be told by other panelists, and my good friend Colonel Sajjad is there to tell that story. But the role played by the Mukti Bahini was an outstanding example of great courage and perseverance against the greatest odds. India too played a very important role in training and supporting the freedom fighters, and the cooperation between the two countries and the two forces was exemplary. I think it is important here now to dwell what was the world doing when a genocide was taking place under its nose. We start with the genocide starting with Operation Searchlight, and immediately thereafter, Arthur Kent Blood, who was the commissioner, the U.S. High Commissioner or the ambassador in the East Wing, who was located at that time in East Pakistan, he sends out the first missive on 27th March 1971, telling the American government what is happening. But America took no cognizance of what had been stated by their own representative. So what he did was, on 6th April, he sends out a dissent cable. And later on, this dissent cable was dubbed as the Blood Telegram, and a book has been written on the subject. And he addressed this to the US Secretary of State, William P. Rogers, which castigated his own government. This found its way into the press, and the truth suddenly became the news in the United States. But despite that, the West and the United States did not pay much attention because Pakistan happened to be their ally. And which really brings me to the conclusion that when people talk of human rights, it is not so much human rights which they are interested in, but their own perceived national self-interest. Then we come to another report coming out by Mr. Simon Blink. He was a British reporter. And a small snippet now appears on the front pages of the Daily Telegraph of 30th March 1971. Subsequently, the BBC carried a broadcast made on the 27th of March 1971 by Major Ziaur Rahman from a small clandestine radio station in Chittagong, reading out Mujibur's declaration of Bangladeshi independence. But by then, it had mostly been interpreted as a justification for a Pakistani crackdown rather than the other way around. Now, the defining change came actually when Pakistani journalist Neville Anthony Mascarenhas penned his article, Genocide, and this was published in the Sunday Times on 13 June 1971. Mascarenhas had originally been embedded by the Pakistani government with the Pakistani forces in East Pakistan in order to report favorably. But he was so disturbed by what he saw that he escaped to the United Kingdom. His article on the Bangladesh genocide has been credited by the BBC as having exposed for the first time the scale of the Pakistan Army's brutal campaign, and indeed even impelled India to look at a military option to resolve the humanitarian crisis. Now, this is what was written actually in that article. We come on to something very interesting which happened then in August 1971. We have the great Indian sitarist Ravi Shankar getting together with the Beatle George Harrison and arranging a concert for Bangladesh in Madison Square. This was done on a Sunday, I think it was the 9th of August. And along with these greats came Ringo Starr, the other Beatle, Bob Dylan, we had Eric Clapton, Billy Preston, Len Russell, and we had the band Badfinger. And in one day, they gave 2 concerts, and the whole world knew the new name which they gave, Bangladesh. Now Bangladesh resonated across the world. And this got a further fillip a few weeks later when on 13th August, Edward Kennedy visited India, and he saw for the first time the condition of the refugees, the millions who had poured into India. But despite all this, really, the world opinion did not castigate Pakistan when right under their nose, the biggest genocide was taking place. So we come to various political initiatives. Now, the 9 months preceding the war, from the time of the infamous crackdown to the launching of operations by the Indian Armed Forces on 4 December 2020, it witnessed hectic political activity with the Indian Prime Minister meeting world leaders across the globe to sensitize them to the carnage taking place in East Pakistan. India signed a treaty of peace and friendship with the Soviet Union on 9th of August 1971, and Prime Minister Indira Gandhi also visited the Soviet Union for 2 days on 27 to 29 September. Importantly, her 21-day tour of Europe and America, beginning on 24th October, achieved little more than sympathy from the leaders of Europe. In Britain, Indira Gandhi addressed an audience at the India League and told them that she felt as though, and I quote, she was sitting on top of a volcano, and I honestly do not know when it will erupt, unquote. The US, however, remained intransigent. The meeting with Nixon took place on 4th and 5th November in the White House, in the Oval Office. But it achieved little. And the chill in the office was freezing. For Indira Gandhi, war as an option was never ruled out. But it was the option of the last resort. That option was exercised on the 4th of December 1971, and the rest is history. But I think we need to pause and think. When we look back at these 25 years, we look back at how disintegration took place, we look back at a genocide which occurred, and we also look back at the silence of the world. And we need to reflect on what went wrong and why, and see that it never happens again. With this, I end. Thank you for your very patient listening. Namaskar, Jai Bharat, Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, General Katoch, for that very comprehensive landscape or overview of what South Asia looked like on the threshold of commencement of military operations. Now, before I invite Major General Ian Cardozo, the irrepressible General Cardozo, I thought I will take this opportunity for our listeners, for many of our young listeners, to sort of get a peek into actually what happened in the military operations room in army headquarters when a decision was being taken when to plan the operations. And I will read a paragraph from my book in which General Pandit, an engineer officer who later retired as a corps commander, was a major in the MO Directorate. And here was a young major briefing the Chief of the Army Staff, General Manekshaw, on what are the logistics constraints of opening a front too early. And I quickly read this paragraph. Early in March, I was called to the ops room and found General Manekshaw, the Vice Chief of Army Staff, the Director of Military Intelligence, and my boss, the Director of Military Operations, engaged in an animated discussion. My boss, who was at the lectern, told me as soon as he came in, "Tell the chief." And Manekshaw cryptically asked, "KK, that is, KK tells me that it will take 3 months to do the logistics stockings. Are you sure?" I said, "Yes, sir." "Have you consulted Eastern Command and spoken to Setna?" Setna was the BGS at Headquarters Eastern Command. I said, "Yes, sir, I have." The chief probed the major further. "Have you spoken to Jakes?" Jakes, Lieutenant General Jacob, was the Chief of Staff of Eastern Command and a trusted lieutenant of Manekshaw. I said, "No, sir, but I would assume that he would have been told." Manekshaw was relentless and probed. "Is that the best you can do?" I stuck to my gun. And Manekshaw replied, "That bloody takes me to the middle of monsoon. What if I want to cut it short by a month?" Then the major continued very directly, "Sir, you will be able to go in only from Calcutta, from one direction." I was clear in my mind that we would not be able to envelop East Pakistan from all directions as Manekshaw had planned. With that, I would now invite Major General Ian Cardozo to shape the landscape further of war in the Eastern Theatre, where he was very much a part of the action. General Cardozo, welcome and good to see you again, sir. General Cardozo, could you please unmute yourself?